Good. So last session we had a pretty open discussion about lots of different topics. We started to unpack. We realised there's lots of layers and they're all interconnected. We've had some really great feedback since last episode, and we've also put a poll out as well. And I think we've started to unpack a few things here. And this is a nice segue into the results of the poll that we put up online. I'm just going to dig those out, Andy, because I was quite surprised by the results. So we said we asked people the question, do you think purchasable loot boxes are okay in games? So we specifically talked about purchasable loot boxes. We offered people the answer of yes, yes but with changes, yes but regulated, and no. And interestingly, 23% of respondents said yes, that they are okay. 15% said yes, but with changes. 46%, so the highest number there, said yes but regulated, and 15% said no. So that is different to what I was expecting. I was expecting that most people would err on the side of self-regulation, yes but with changes, rather than yes but regulated. So it seems, and it wasn't the biggest data set, not thousands of people, and it's
was it more than 100? That would probably be my cut over.
It wasn't more than 100.
It wasn't, okay.
But it was a small community, but community of people within our network who are I would probably say 100% in the industry.
Okay.
And so it was interesting that the feeling was, and it was an anonymous one as well, so no one's got to worry about that, was feeling that yes but regulated. So Andy, were you a little bit surprised by that response as well?
Yes and no, you'd be unsurprised to know. Yes, because I think that from my experience, this kind of divides players into two camps: those who hate, those who love, or frankly, those who don't care versus those who hate. My experience is those who are disappointed by loot boxes, aka hate loot boxes, are pretty vocal. Those who don't care so much don't really say very much.
Yeah.
But actually, if our community is much more industry driven, which it probably is, and I think I've got some ideas where we can widen that to players, then I'm not surprised, yes, with regulation. Purely and simply, I'm not saying that the industry wants regulation, but if you think about it, if this is an uncertainty, and bear in mind what Nicholas has shared with everybody about fiduciary governance. If there's uncertainty, the best way of dealing with uncertainty actually is to have a regulation. What you want as an industry is you want fair and reasonable regulation. You want an informed regulation.
Yeah.
So that you take away the rough edges, and from the consumer's perspective, from the customer's perspective, from the stakeholders' perspective,
you build confidence.
It's all very clear.
Yes.
What it is, and people can worry less rather than stop worrying. And regulation and re-regulation is my personal mantra of how the world needs to carry on, because I don't believe in heavy rules. I believe in reasonable rules, because I believe fundamentally human beings sometimes can't be trusted when the greed aspect comes into their mind. And I think re-regulation is perfectly okay. I'm not a person who says, oh, all this red tape's terrible, just let people get on with it, Well, get on with what exactly?
Yeah.
So I do think, and balance that up with, if you've got the regulators properly informed, properly educated, properly aware and confident in what they're saying and what they're ordering, then that's a really good outcome. And speaking sort of locally from the UK perspective, the Gambling Commission is currently the regulator of everything to do with gambling, says on the tin really. The Gambling Act of 2005 is a relatively recent piece of legislation. It's 15 years old. It was never, ever put in law with any real idea about digital, with real idea about cross-border. It regulated citizens within the UK, playing, gambling, and operators within the UK. And in that 15-year period, you've seen most of the operators actually up sticks and move their operations and their tax base, frankly, outside of the UK. Most of them went to Gibraltar. With Brexit, they've moved to Malta, funnily enough. Not all, but most. And the gambling companies do employ lots of people on UK soil and provide jobs which are pretty well paid actually and pretty productive. So, that's a balance too. But with loot boxes, the Gambling Commission have been sort of asked, are loot boxes gambling? And it's not really for the Gambling Commission to absolutely say yes or no. They're the regulator. They've got expertise, but ultimately it's a point of law. And that's where it's probably a slight fork in the road here with the UK, because the Gambling Act of 2005 is being currently reviewed. And that process is beginning in earnest. It will take, most likely, in this COVID situation, longer to adjust that legislation. So in other words, the law will be added to. Things that are irrelevant now will probably be taken out of the law. There won't be many of those, but there's a load of stuff with the digital world, the connected digital world, that will need to be written into that legislation in order to protect UK citizens. That's what law is supposed to be there for. And there's a whole load of processes that you go through before that bill becomes an act of law. I mean, it's a huge process that most of us don't understand.
So, Andy, I think you're right about all of that process, but I think a couple of points along the way, and part of it's for our American viewers, which is that the American law is very much set on it's lawful or it isn't, and if it is, you can do it.
Correct.
And quite a lot of the attitudes toward loot boxes are, we've taken a look, we know what the law says, so we're fine. And we can go as close to the law as possible, and that's fine. A lot of British law still sits back in that old, slightly out of old-fashioned, my word is my bond, I'll know it if I see it kind of stuff. And right now, not specifically the gambling regulations, they are quite specific. But the new child protection, the child code from the Data Protection Organization is driven by principles. It's backed with the force of law, but the principle is, are you taking appropriate precautions to protect children from giving up their data? This is a different example, Spike, so I'm going slightly off-piste, but you can't get a lawyer to say, I know exactly what the laws are, because the questions are, did you behave appropriately and proportionately to protect children? Quite a lot of British regulation and European regulation goes a bit closer to that. US regulation tends to be very stuck on legalese. So to your point, Andy, about the interpretation of whether or not the loot boxes are gambling by the Gambling Commission, it being a point of law, absolutely. But the different places where that can be challenged, the Gambling Commission itself could make a recommendation to Parliament that says, no, we think it is gambling. They might then have to do something which could be secondary legislation, which, without getting into too much details, is quicker. Maybe it has to be primary legislation, or maybe it's something like the class action lawsuit in Canada, creating sufficient precedents for this being legislation. The Gambling Commission looked around and went, look, 4 different jurisdictions in the world have said this is, what do we think? And that could potentially, and I'm not an expert here, but that could potentially tip over into being, you really can't do this anymore. This is where the world has gone, without the formal lobbying process and the long laws and everything else.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get at the fact that things could change quicker than you're suggesting.